Gearing up to hire for your sales team? Learn the essential traits to look for during the interview process on this episode of Closing Time. Thanks for tuning into Closing Time, the show for go-to-market leaders. I'm Val Riley, head of marketing for Insightly CRM and Unbounce. Today, I am joined by Kevin Gaither. He is CEO of Inside Sales Expert. Welcome to Closing Time, Kevin.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, and happy to share my wisdom along with my mistakes.
Great. I love it. So let's go back in time to 2007.
Yeah.
You had shared with us that you had the very difficult task of doing a large-scale layoff of salespeople. Take me back to that time. What was going through your mind?
Yeah, much like most any sales leader that's out there, I wasn't trained on how to interview. It was just sort of, we need to hire 30 more people as quickly as possible. 90 days actually is what the number was. And good luck, do your best. And I didn't get any sort of training whatsoever. And then after about 6 months after I'd made those hires, the VP of sales said, oops, we made a miscalculation and we need to let all these, a bunch of these people go, and went from 30 down to like 12. Look, if you've had to fire one person, it's awful. Having to, get rid of 18 people was awful. And even though it wasn't my fault, and this is important for your audience, it wasn't my fault, but I felt incredibly guilty, awful about having to lay all these people off. And I wanted to do my best, Val, moving forward so that I could do my part to make sure that never happened again, that I could be as good of a hiring manager as possible.
Well, I mean, I love that, Kevin, because really everything is a learning experience, especially when those things happen early on in your career. And I like how you've been able to, zero in on this and flip it to a positive. So you kind of came up with like 6 traits that you thought were essential for success in salespeople. First of all, how did you narrow it down to 6?
Well, there was definitely a lot of trial and error. Just to be clear, this was 2007. Okay. So I've had a lot of time. And at that time, I went on a quest. I wanted to teach myself how to become a better interviewer and hirer and selector of salespeople. And I read books like Top Grading for Sales, Never Hire a Bad Salesperson Again by Dr. Chris Croner, all 3 of those books, and consumed as much as I possibly could and came up with my own hiring benchmark against which I wanted to hire future salespeople. And those 6 traits probably weren't on the list, to begin with. But over time, and after I took over sales teams, Val, hired more salespeople, built new sales teams, I realized that these 6 characteristics were evergreen. Doesn't matter if you're hiring for SDRs, experienced enterprise salespeople, inside salespeople, middle market salespeople, even customer success if they have quotas. These 6 traits are ubiquitous. They are evergreen. I believe firmly that you would always look for these if you're hiring for any sort of quota carrying role.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you mentioned that, because you're not focusing so much on, for example, like an enterprise AE versus an SDR might need something different. You're really just focusing in on the traits. So it's not about like years of experience necessarily, but who they really come across as people.
Yes. And to be clear, Val, I separate those out. Yes, I can have requirements of history and background and things like that. But the characteristics and the traits of the person, those are something separate entirely. And those are evergreen. Yes, of course. If I'm hiring an enterprise salesperson, I want a lot more experience in complex selling compared to an SDR right out of college or high school or something like that. So yes, great distinction between the past track record and these behavioral traits.
All right. So the big reveal, I think we're all ready.
Yes.
And you've been very generous in your LinkedIn posting by sharing this wisdom. But the 6 traits, I'll go ahead and list them, are coachability, resourcefulness, continual learning, need for achievement, competitiveness, and I think my favorite might be optimism. So clearly these really resonated with you. I'd like to dive into a couple. and
Right.
figure out how you would ascertain a person's how they embody those traits while just on a job interview, because it's really
Yeah.
just such a short time we spend with folks. So, for example, why is the need for achievement on your list? And how would you determine in an interview process if someone has a high need for achievement?
Yeah. And by the way, the central premise around these six, these are characteristics that people show up with. You can't train these. These aren't skills. It's not like, teaching somebody how to type, or use a different CRM platform. So the thing that resonates the most and the common denominator amongst those is they either have them or they don't. And because these are skills and behaviors during any of the interviews that you're going to have, you can utilize behavioral interview questions to figure out whether or not they possess these characteristics. And what you'll hear through the rest of these questions when you get to it, when you ask me, it's tell me about a time when. Okay. And I want to make a really important distinction, because this is a mistake that I made when I didn't know any better. And a lot of sales leaders make this mistake to this day. They ask about future. How would you handle a situation that looked like this? If you were in this situation, what would you do? Val, that is not nearly as important as what they have done in exact situations like that, in the past. So need for achievement is what, to me, one of the six, one of the most important, because this demonstrates, the definition in my template that I offer for free is a burning need to achieve. They're ambitious, they're disciplined, they're focused on advancement. They're willing to do things that others will not do in favor of their goals. These people work their butts off. Okay. And so a couple of the questions that I would ask, some of my favorites. What kinds of sacrifices have you had to make in your personal life in favor of success in your business life? Another great question. Tell me about a few times when you've exceeded expectations or went beyond the call of duty. These are these maniacs that, you tell them to do one thing and they then go do 50% more than that. And they weren't even asked to do those things. If you have somebody like that on your sales team where their motor is just constantly running and they're always looking to do more and do better, oh my gosh, you're cooking with gas, Val, when you have somebody that whose motor already runs like that. They always want to be moving forward. They're ambitious. They want to keep, and they work their butts off. And these are real questions. Tell me about a time when, and that they can tell you real stories with details and times.
All right, now you're looking for the Energizer Bunny is what it sounds like.
Yeah. And they're far and few between, admittedly.
I do love this approach because, if you're asking something future state, people might answer in a way of how they want to show up for you in this role, but versus the reality of how they've shown up in the past in roles is really what you're getting to the core of.
You're 100%. They're looking for the right answer rather than telling you how they actually behaved. 100%. Great summary, Val.
You're right. They might just be answering of what they think the interviewer wants to hear. And as a young interviewer or an inexperienced interviewer, it can be very easy to fall into a trap and be like, well, this person is just saying everything right, but they really maybe can't back it up. Anyway, let's move on because we have a couple more to go into, because I like how we're being tactical here and you're actually giving examples of questions. So one of those traits was competitiveness. So again, I'll ask you, what types of questions would you ask somebody to determine if they are truly competitive or not?
Yeah, very good. And I'm going to hit a nail right on the head, by the way. There's sales leaders out there that also misconstrue competitiveness with athletes. These are not the exact same thing. Furthermore, they could be incredibly exclusionary. There is a lot of people that never played competitive sports in their lives, but they're incredibly, competitive. And so you want to make sure that your mind is open. Second, here's a really awful question, Val. Which would do you hate to lose or love to win? This is the one that I love to beat up on LinkedIn all the time, and it gets everybody all fired up. That is the dumbest question because once again, they're looking what's the right answer. They're trying to figure out the right answer. So a couple of questions that I like to ask: when was the last time you were competitive? And the best and most competitive people answer that question. They'll look up and to the left a little bit, and then they'll go, well, do you mean like personal or at work? Which do you mean? And when they say that, that's fantastic because in their minds, they are always competitive. They're always eyeing their peers. Everything is a competitive situation where they can be playing with their kids or playing FIFA with their friends, but yet they're always competitive. And you want to hear multiple recent stories yesterday, last week, both business and personal, because I'm not separating. I just want to look for a trait. Are they competitive? Tell me one about works. And you'll hear salespeople say, well, to be in sales, you always have to be competitive. Oh, great. Well, then how about yesterday? Tell me what you were doing yesterday that leads me to believe that you were competitive. So real recent stories.
I appreciate that because, you can be a very competitive person, but just not be very coordinated. And still, it's your competitiveness shines through in areas other than being an athlete. So just want to commend you for separating those two.
Oh, 1,000%. By the way, there was a quick story. A woman that I hired never played competitive sports in her life, but she was a front of the class yoga person. Her name was Pauline, by the way. I'll never forget because that was a perfect example of somebody who never played competitive sports. And this woman, she'd be doing the whatever vinyasa pose. And she was telling me a story how she'd open her eyes and look left and look right to see who was falling down. And when they would fall down, she'd be like, yes, I'm winning. And I thought, what a great example of if I was just looking for sales athletes, I never would have interviewed Pauline as the front of the class yoga person.
Well, on behalf of all the uncoordinated people out there, I would just thank you for that. Let's do another one. And again, I think this one is my favorite because you say optimism is a very important trait in sales. So why optimism? And tell me how you would ask questions to see if someone was optimistic.
Yeah. So optimism, this is thick skin. The definition, provides the body armor to withstand the inevitable rejections of selling, credits themselves with success, but doesn't take defeat personally. Really important there. Okay. So tell me about the worst customer problem you'd ever faced. How did you recover from that situation? Of course, those two pieces go together, right? Tell me about the worst customer problem you ever faced. How did you recover from that? And what you're looking for is quickly put the situation in perspective and just got back on the phones and started moving forward and came back stronger after tough times. Think back to the last time you lost a deal. When was the last time you lost a deal? Oh my gosh, it was last month. What did you do to recover from that? Like once again, quickly put it in perspective, bounce back by working on another sale or getting back on the phone. The best salespeople that I've interviewed that have boatloads of optimism, Val, they're the ones that say, yeah, I got my butt handed to me, lost this huge deal to a customer. I went into my boss's office, I vented a little bit and debriefed with my boss about what I did wrong and what I could have done better. And then I say, well, what did you do next? I went back to my desk and got back on the phone. And they're confused. What else would you do? If you have high optimism, what are you going to do? Wallow in your tears? The other stories are, the bad stories. I lost a sale and I was so distraught. I had to take the rest of the day off and take a mental health day the next day. I have no tolerance for that stuff. None whatsoever. And I'm not saying I don't have tolerance for mental health. What I'm saying is if you're in sales and you get your butt handed to you and you can't learn how to recover from that, get off the phones. You really should not be in sales if you don't have thick skin. So that's where optimism. And once again, I don't care if you're an enterprise salesperson, customer success rep, an SDR, or your SMB salesperson. Everybody has to deal with rejection of some kind in sales. It's why it's one of the fundamental traits against which I would always look for salespeople of any kind.
I appreciate that perspective because it is important. There are times, looking back on my career, I've survived a couple of recessions, and there are times where sales is just a little bit easier because you've got some economic tailwinds. And then you come to a point like, 2008 or, even 2022, 2023, where you kind of lose that tailwind. And if the salespeople that have been coasting along because of some nice economic conditions are really the ones that struggle during those periods.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Like right on. Like when things get tough and you're like, "Oh, it's so hard." Now you're whining and moaning about how high your quota is. Yet, you benefited from the upsides, along the way.
It's, a career in sales is going to span 10, 20, 30 years, and you're going to have to realize that there's ups and downs. So I think you're going to be leaning on that optimism quite a bit.
No question. Yeah, no question about it. Yeah. Thick skin. Thick skin. Absolutely.
So I really feel like we've helped some sales leaders today who are getting prepped for their next candidate interview. You have a great resource that takes sales hiring one step further. Can you tell us about the 77 questions, which I love that number, 77 questions to ask salespeople? Where can folks get that resource and tell us a little more about it?
Yeah, if you just go to insidesalesexpert.com and you'll see my free guide section, there's like 10 plus guides in there, but the most popular download is the 77 salesperson interview questions. These are literally, I didn't mean it to be 77. It ended up turning out to be 77, which is lucky for me. And it's broken into like 20 different characteristics with interview questions in each of those, including the 6 that we've mentioned here, of course, as a plug and play interview guide that a sales leader or hiring manager can download today and start using these questions immediately that I have used over the last 25 plus years of hiring salespeople, making mistakes and learning from those mistakes. So insidesalesexpert.com, look on my free guide section and you'll see the 77 salesperson interview questions.
Perfect. I also recommend Kevin out there for a follow on LinkedIn. He does share a lot of great information on LinkedIn, so please check him out.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us, Kevin. Really appreciate you giving us the time today.
My pleasure. Happy to be on here, and hopefully I was helpful to some people in your audience. Thanks again, Val.
Sure. Thanks to all of you for tuning into Closing Time. Remember, you can get these episodes delivered right to your inbox by clicking the link in the show notes. We will see you next week.